Greetings, cats and kittens. Welcome once again to Baggy Hi-Fi, this YouTube channel devoted to record collecting and the vinyl community here in the UK. Once again, I'm teaming up with Ed Pinsent this week for our second symposium or get together to talk about records and music. The theme this week is, or this time around, this video is spiritual music and what is spiritual music to us and the listening experience that we might regard as spiritual. I mean, I think at one time, spiritual music would have been, or way back 30, 40 years ago, spiritual music would have probably meant, in most people's minds, music with a religious context, and maybe music that would be performed in a particular place or context, ritual context, sacred music. But of course, there are a much broader range of possibilities in what we might think is spiritual music, especially as there are so many people who are not aligned to any particular spiritual belief or faith. So I think what we can maybe talk about in this video as we show our choices, I think we've got it down to 7 records. One of mine is a CD. We've just been talking about that before we started recording. What we think about music which is spiritual but not necessarily religious, and what is it about the listening experience which we would regard, why we would say it is particularly spiritual or transcendent or uplifting or visionary or magical or sublime. So that's the broad theme for this video. As I'll just say by way of introduction, if you didn't see the last video I made with Ed Pinsent is editor of a magazine, music magazine, Sound Projector, and a website with regular reviews, and also a radio show, the Sound Projector radio show on Resonance Radio. So over to you, Ed, if you want to add anything to that as we begin.
No, I think you've covered it all there, John. I'm still reeling from your introduction there.
Right.
Some very deep questions, which maybe over the next hour we can get to skirt around the edges of those questions. And
I think so. I mean, I think it'll all be very subjective, and personal, I guess, as well. Some of the records I'm going to show are, I guess, sort of loosely religious anyway. But we'll see. Would you like to start?
I'd be glad to, yes, if you're quite sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed.
Yes. So let's see, record number 1, Popol Vuh.
Yes.
We had Popol Vuh last time.
We did.
Yes, here's another one. Very nice original vinyl on United Artists Germany.
Nice.
And this one is called can't pronounce the German. Letzte Tage, letzte Nacht. In English, it would mean last days, last nights.
Oh, I see. It's not a soundtrack. It's an actual just a Popol Vuh album. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. If you buy Popol Vuh records, you're almost guaranteed to get a soundtrack at one point or another, and it'll be a soundtrack to a Werner Herzog movie. Yes.
But this one isn't. This one is not. No, it is actually a Popol Vuh album from 1976. And the lineup certainly includes Florian Fricke and the guitar player Daniel. Look at the name, can't pronounce that either. Daniel Fischelscher. I'm very sorry about my pronunciation, but he's a core member of the group Popol Vuh.
I think it's interesting with Popol Vuh that they began as an electronic group, and associated with krautrock and kosmische music, but they quite quickly dropped the electronics, didn't they, and became a band with quite a lot of acoustic instruments and piano, and so that I don't think they fit into the mold that some people might put them into as being a electronic krautrock band.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to apply the krautrock genre, Popol Vuh were very hard to fit into that genre, as you've said. And yeah, the evolution is strange and eccentric. And the first LP is largely electronic, Affenstunde, made on a very big Moog.
Yes.
But he bought it from Klaus Schultz, I believe.
Right.
It's one of those huge moves that is like the size of a wardrobe or something. It's like a big mahogany cabinet.
I remember the picture on the back of the album, this thing with all wires coming out of it, you know, very, very impressive.
Yeah,
Something that you
very impressive.
could probably do now on a little tiny keyboard, but they're great, those old Moogs.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you could do it digitally. I'm really not sure about that. I think the jack plug experience, EMS Moogs and so on is hard to replicate.
Right.
You know, I believe it introduces a degree of unpredictable behavior working with jack plugs. And that's what I've learned from Philip Sanderson and from Sonic Boom as well.
Yeah.
Sonic Boom used
Right.
to have one of those
Yes.
EMS Moogs. So yeah, they do try. Yes.
Yeah.
So this particular record, yeah, it's one I absolutely love. I'm trying to. The spiritual component is hard to pin down. I mean,
Yeah.
let's talk about Florian Fricke, for instance. I mean, I would characterize him as somebody who's interested in world religion.
Yes.
What shows up in his music is occasionally something that looks like a Christian tradition, like he might do a Kyrie, or he might do something that resembles a mass.
Yeah.
And he's done songs about King David,
Yeah.
taking something from the Old Testament.
Mhm.
But then he'll do something like tantric songs,
Yes.
and he'll do music that's influenced by India and by you know, he's drawn a lot of influence from other countries. So I think both spiritually and musically he's a real world guy.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's the name of the band as well. I think it's taken from the Mayan peoples, isn't it? Some sort of document or history.
The Mayan Codex. The Mayan Codex.
Codex,
Comes from, yes. Yeah. I don't know quite what it means, but it is some. Yeah, it's a non-Western religion.
Yeah.
Is it Aztec perhaps? Yeah, and it's ancient as well. He's probably, I would guess, he had an interest in ancient cultures. You know, not just the 20th century.
Yeah. Great group.
So, yeah.
I'm going to be showing some pop over myself later on. So.
Well, they do pass on this. I think this this incredibly calming feeling through the music, and it also inspires a kind of awe, doesn't it? A kind of respect and stillness.
Yes, I think so. Seems to be a renewed interest in new age music at the moment, and people buying up, you know, these Windham Hill albums, but they're not the same thing as pop over. You know, they may sound ambient and soothing and relaxing, but I don't think they have much depth. Well, the ones I've heard anyway, you know, these sort of 1980s soothing, relaxing, new age recordings, which people seem to be liking now and playing up. But I think pop over are the real thing. There's real depth to it.
I agree 100%, John. I didn't know there was a resurgence of interest in new age music.
Yes.
But I would regard it with a certain amount of skepticism, because I think people want a quick fix. You know, they want a kind of instant satisfaction of some sort. Whereas, pop over has a real depth.
Yeah, the other day when I knew we were going to be talking about spiritual music, I just typed in Google spiritual music, and the first thing that came up was, you know, soothing, relaxing sounds. But you know, there's more to spirituality than being relaxed and hearing, you know.
Well, the particular song I like on this is the title song, "Last Days, Last Nights." It ends the LP, as a matter of fact. Yeah. And although it is beautiful music, it's also quite restless. It appears to be sort of galloping over a hill in some way, you know, kind of moving forward towards some extraordinary destiny or something which you're not sure is going to, what it's going to be. And the lyric is saying, when love is calling you, turn around and follow. And that's a very inspiring message. Yes. And within the music is this pull where you've got to take a chance on something, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So the other remark I want to make is the cover, which
pastoral.
Pastoral, exactly, yeah. And alone amongst Popol Vuh, please, this looks like something which is verging on Christian imagery of sheep may safely graze. Yes. You know, you almost expect Jesus shepherd figure to appear on this, but it doesn't quite. It's you know, it's a nice Johann Sebastian Bach cover. And speaking of CDs, compare it with this, which
Okay.
is the CD reissue of same album from 2005 on SPV. And the cover, they've really got it badly wrong. I think it's been rephotographed, and you see the original is quite green,
Green, yes.
and
That
here
one
it looks like it's all burnt. It's like scorched earth. Scorched earth policy has suddenly taken over. It's
poor sheep
it's,
feeding on dried grass. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. The parched
it's not the same,
grass.
it's not the same image, is it? No.
Not quite the same message.
No.
Yeah, so it also doesn't sound very good.
Right.
And the other thing that's stupid about these CDs is look at that tray.
Yeah.
It looks as though Florian Fricke has got a snout,
Yes.
prong sticking out over his nose there.
Oh well, yeah. Stick to the vinyl.
Yep. Okay, that's me.
Good. Thanks, Ed. Well, my first record is one that you used to see I used to see quite often in charity shops, and it does pop up now and again. It's certainly not an expensive album. And I think it was quite a hit in the 60s, although it was recorded in the 50s, 1958. And it's Mr. Luba. Music, it's a mass, it's a Catholic mass. Words are sung in Latin, but it's formed by an African choir from the Congo. And I suppose it's an early example of world music in a sense, because it was, I was reading about the background of it. It was a Belgian priest who was working in the Congo who wanted to encourage, indigenous music to be used in Catholic worship. So it's quite an early example of that. And it was such a success that the church accepted it as a Congolese rite, which I think is still used today. But probably the first time I ever heard the music from this Mr. Luba would have been in Lindsay Anderson's film If. And last night I watched again the passage in the film, which is you're not sure whether it's a fantasy sequence or not. But if anyone watching this hasn't seen the film If by Lindsay Anderson, it's a predecessor of Clockwork Orange, but it's nothing like Clockwork Orange. But Malcolm McDowell is in it. He plays a public school boy who initiates a rebellion in the school. But the scene that the Sanctus comes in from this Mr. Luba recording, it's so powerful, such a powerful mix of visuals and music that is well chosen. I'm not sure whether it was Lindsay Anderson himself who chose to take an extract from this, but
do you mean the scene in the roadside cafe? Yes,
in the cafe,
yes.
Where the
cafe, yes.
girl who works behind the counter sort of leaps over the counter and starts this sort of very sexual dance with Malcolm, who's still wearing his school uniform, and mixed with the tribal drumming, but also the sacred words. It's quite an astonishing scene. So a great example of visuals and music going together, taking the music out of its original context, but the music itself stands up very well. So this cost me £2.
It does.
Yeah,
it's excellent. I mean, it's £2. Yeah, there's been many issues of that one. I've got a much later one with a different cover.
yes.
It's got an African fetish on the cover, but I love it as well. It's a great piece of music.
It is.
And
I think,
and in the movie as well, it's kind of like you also think that it's the school song in some way. The way that it's positioned with the editing, and you think that maybe the choir boy is singing the school song of this terrible public school.
Yeah, I think so. Even that scene, there are cuts in of the school choir, as well as Malcolm doing this sexual scene. Well, with the girl in the roadside cafe, but. Great film. I think it still stands up quite well. The film. I think the last time I watched it was about 10 years ago, but it seemed to be a powerful film then with some great music.
It is very surreal as well, and very, very critical, as Lindsay Anderson was. He was very committed socialist, very, very critical of power structures in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
But I remember I bought that LP in I think because it was one of the first jobs I ever had in Liverpool, when I suddenly felt flush, suddenly felt I had a lot of money. And I
Yes.
went into a record shop and said, have you got a record of the music from Lindsay Anderson's If?
Right.
Yeah, for some reason, I thought it was something called African Sanctus by
Yeah.
David Fanshawe.
Oh.
And the guy behind the counter said, no, what you want is Mr. Luba.
Yes.
But because I was feeling so flush, I bought both LPs.
All right. How is the record? Any good?
Well, African Sanctus, yeah, it's quite good. Yeah, it's a bit populist, you know, but at least David Fanshawe he visited Africa regularly, you know, and made lots of recordings there. He was a latter-day is the word ethnographical permitted? I don't know. Is that kind of, you know, he wanted to document the indigenous culture in sound, and then incorporated it in his own compositions. So it's quite far-sighted. I mean, it's not too far away from David Bedford or something like that.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah.
Sort of integration of classical music with African singing and so on. But yeah, good stuff. So Mr. Luba, lovely.
Yeah. Okay, your
turn. Yes, thank you. So what I've got here is, this is by Washington Phillips, and well, I'm a big blues collector. I've been collecting country blues, as it's called, for about 40 years, I guess. And what country blues refers to is American blues records made in America in the 1920s and 1930s. And they weren't really made in the country at all. They're often recorded in the city, but I don't know how the term stuck. No. But Washington Phillips, yeah, I'm trying to think when his dates were now, when this was recorded, 1927, 28, around then. And this is a really unique record. So even if you don't like the blues, you really ought to hear this, because this guy was really quite extraordinary. Because he's a singer, and he played this unusual instrument, which I'll get to in a minute. But what you probably think it's going to be is some kind of gospel record, of which there were a large number in the 1920s and 30s. You'd find these gospel groups led by a leader, Reverend so-and-so, who would try and exhort the choir towards some kind of spiritual ecstasy or redemption. And quite often the records were part sermon, part singing, because there'd be a choir with tambourines and so on. But this is nothing like that at all. This is some guy with his own very, very personal vision of what his faith means to him.
Yes. And
he expresses it in song. And he also expresses it by playing an instrument. Now, when this came out, it came out on the Dutch label Agram Blues, I think sometime in the early 80s.
Right.
And we didn't know that much about Washington Phillips then. And so the person who put it out assumed that the instrument he was playing was a dulcimer.
Right.
Which is what you see on the cover here.
With hammers.
Yes, which you play the hammer, yeah. Now scholars think he was playing a zither. But we're still not sure. It seemed to be an elaborate number of instruments that were taken into the recording studio, and he had a very unusual approach to playing them. I think hammers may have been involved on the zither. I'm just not sure. But also since then, a photograph of Washington Phillips himself has come to light.
Yes.
So we know what he looks like as well. But this is absolutely beautiful music. I mean, as soon as you hear it, you're just enchanted, because it sounds like a lovely musical box. A lovely innocent musical box from the 19th century, and then this frail but very confident voice, expressing both some kind of religious conviction but also a certain amount of emotional pain and anguish as well.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. There's really nothing like it in the history of recorded sound. Very mysterious and mystical fellow indeed.
I have heard it. I do know it, but I do agree that it does sound quite different from other gospel blues records. You know, that maybe the singer would have a guitar and play, a more familiar style of that we would associate with blues music. But it does sound very fragile, as you say, that zither sound, and quite otherworldly in a sense as well. And I think the singing style of Washington Phillips is it's obviously very sincere and honest and passionate. So I think it's great that he's been rediscovered. I didn't realize it was as long ago as the 80s. I think I maybe first heard him 10 years ago. Yeah, it's a shame that they didn't record more of his songs if he had any.
Yes, again, you find very few surviving recordings, and all that's left is, of course, is the original 78s. There's no master tapes from a studio anywhere, obviously. Yeah, there have been reissues since. I think Doxy have put something together, for Washington Phillips. Yeah, but he's.
I think some indie artists have covered his songs as well. You know Will Oldham, Palace Brothers fella.
Yes.
I don't have any records by him, but I believe he has done some cover versions of Washington Phillips songs.
Oh, that's news to me. That's good. No, I think he's, people are beginning to pick up on him, because it's he's unusual, as I've said already, in the genre of blues, he really stands out.
Yeah.
And people like eccentrics now. Everybody loves Sun Ra. They hated Sun Ra when he was around, but now everybody thinks, oh yeah, what a far out guy Sun Ra was,
Yes, yeah.
And the more far out the better. So yeah, Washington Phillips is along those lines, but it's yeah, as I say, I think the other thing to mention is the ambiguity, because he's not out to convert anybody to any way of thinking, and it's quite the opposite. He appears to be asking questions. What does faith really mean?
Yes.
And how can we live by it, and so on. And it's very, very interesting. So I listen to this a lot. I really love it. Lovely music.
Buying blues records for a long time, but that's a great one. Now, we're going to move back to Germany for my next choice, and this one I picked out because of I would say the spiritual power of repetition, and it's Can's first album.
Oh,
bought at Cobb Records in Wales for £1.50 back in the day.
Did you buy this when it came out?
I think it was in the 70s. Yeah.
In the 70s. Yeah. Wow.
But in particular, this is Can's first album. Well, first album as the Can. I think they were called Inner Space before this, weren't they? I think. And
that is true. Yes.
The first singer, Malcolm Mooney, who thought it might be a good idea to call the band Can or the Can. And I do love most of Can's output, but I really like the Malcolm Mooney period when he was the vocalist. This music is very, very repetitive, especially side 2. I mean, obviously, hypnotic and repetitive beats are being used all the way through, rock and roll and rock music. But I just think Can take it to a different level, especially in this period. And you've got to mention Jackie Lieberseit's drumming, which is just astonishing, really. And you do right. Apparently, I was reading about it. It's Malcolm Mooney repeating phrases taken from a love letter. Now, I don't know whether it was a love letter that he'd written himself, or whether one that was maybe found, and he repeats these phrases from the letter, and it's apparently edited down from 5 hours of improvisation down to 20 minutes. So that's almost getting into the Lamont Young area of repetition.
Duration, extreme duration. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's an album I keep returning to, and I think the experience of listening to it is a spiritual one because it's very hypnotic, mantra-like, but also it's a groove as well. And I think there is such a thing as a spiritual groove. But great record, Monster Movie by Can, their first official album.
Excellent. You make a really good case there, John. I never would have thought of that. Do you find that you listen to You Do Right? Do you achieve some kind of insight at the end of it, some kind of epiphany?
Well,
it
builds up, doesn't it? It kind of
builds up, doesn't it? Yes, spiraling into something.
Yes, and then it sort of collapses at the end.
Yeah. I
think maybe 20 minutes of it is perfect, really, and they must have thought that the same as well, unless they were just trying to fit it onto one side of an album. But it's I do think other artists have often recorded long pieces of music and they haven't really worked very well. But it's thinking of many albums in the 70s, but this is recorded in '69. But absolutely wonderful record.
Yeah, I can't beat it.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of bands going on too long, there's apparently the very long version of Helter Skelter by the Beatles, which still not been heard apparently. It sort of went on for about half an hour or something.
Yes,
But maybe it's just a legend, who knows.
Yeah.
But yeah, they too claim to have gone into some kind of trance-like state as they perform this manic piece.
Yes.
So yeah, that particular record, I mean, that it was the very first Can LP on Inner Space. It was a private press record, and it said on the labels, it still does, made in a castle with better equipment. But yeah, because it was private press, it's very rare and collectible now, and is regarded by some collectors as the first krautrock LP.
Yes,
which is it's debatable, shall we say, but it's got that
cover artwork for that version. I don't know. Was it privately pressed? You said, yeah. The first.
I believe so. Yeah, it was put out by Olga Zuke, I think, and the second one was Can Axis. After that, that you probably heard, you know, the Boatwoman song and everything. It was also private press.
I've been listening to the Soundtracks album in the car this week.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Another Sky.
Another Sky, yeah, that's 14 minutes. Another great repetitive drum-driven Can recording.
Yeah. It's really muscular, isn't it? It's very, very lean and kind of airless almost. Yeah. Fantastic sound. Yeah, Malcolm Mooney is a really great figure. I think he's really, you know, real mystery man of rock music. You know, you're never quite sure what to make of him, because as well as that rumor about the 5-hour recording, there's the other great anecdote about I know a live gig where he just kept on chanting upstairs, downstairs, and couldn't stop doing it. You know, upstairs, downstairs. It sort of began as a nursery rhyme of upstairs, downstairs in my lady's chamber or something, but he just got stuck on those two words, and he couldn't stop apparently. Even after the gig had finished and the band had packed up, he was still there. Upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, downstairs.
I haven't heard that story, but remember on side one of Monster Movie, there's Mary, Mary, which is, you know, the nursery rhymes. So I guess that was Malcolm Mooney's choice as well to sing those words.
I think so, yeah. I assume the rest of the members of Can had no interest in lyrical content at all. I think they, you know, left it either to Malcolm Mooney or to Damo Suzuki and say, do whatever you like. And Damo Suzuki had even less interest in lyrical content, I think.
Yeah, because quite often they're not real words, or they don't seem to be anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not very high up in the mix either. No. So again, it's a kind of
Malcolm Mooney. And on the Delay album, which is Malcolm Mooney recordings as well, he is high in the mix.
Yes, he is, isn't he? Yes. Yeah. No, I agree. It is kind of my favourite period of Can, definitely. Yes, I'll say enough good things. So yeah, I'll try this. Yeah, put on You Do Right, and hopefully the shamanistic experience that might result. So, would you like another one from me?
Yes, please.
Yes. What have we got? Oh, so black. Oh, so dark.
Yes.
None more black, as they say. Well, this is a Russian avant-garde composer called Alfred Schnitzky.
Yes.
His name may appear in English font on the back. No, it doesn't. No. There's some English printing on here, but this is a Russian release. So you see his name there in Cyrillic script.
Yes.
And I think this is called Concerto for Grosso Choir. Again, I'm sorry, I can't. Yes, it is. Concerto for Choir in 4 movements. This is it. Yeah. And this is astonishing stuff. And it is just a choir. It's just a polyphony singing.
Yes.
With words that are based on an Estonian medieval poet. No, an Armenian medieval poet. Very sorry. I'll have to read this off the sleeve here. Armenian medieval
Russian, are you?
What? No. There's a little bit of English on the back cover.
I'd be very impressed by that.
Okay. So it is based on the text of the third chapter of the Book of Mournful Songs by the great Armenian medieval poet Gregor Narekatsky, whose years were 951 to 1003.
Wow.
And yeah, I don't know anything about this, but apparently his book was incredibly popular in the Middle Ages. And the theme of it is, I don't know, it's about man's inner life coloured with humanistic individualism typical of Armenian poetry and philosophy of the time. And this is kind of borne out by this particular image there of a tall fellow walking away, and there's a bird flying over his head.
Yeah.
As you can see, he is deep in contemplation of something.
Yes.
So I assume that there was an illustrated edition of this book of poetry, and there he is, thinking only heaven knows what.
How long is the piece of music?
Well, it's spread over 2 sides. I mean, it's LP length.
Yeah.
It's a huge concerto with movements and themes and so on.
He wasn't included on the Exorcist soundtrack, was he, or was that Ligeti? Because I know in the film The Exorcist, there is some 20th century composers used apart from Mike Oldfield, and I think one is definitely Ligeti or Ligeti. The other one might be Schnitzky. I'm probably wrong, but it's just that I have heard the name before.
Yeah, if you said The Shining, that would be another story.
All right.
I can tell you the composers in The Shining quite easily, but The Exorcist, no, you've got me there.
Right.
It's quite possible. We'll have to do some research to this one. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Ligeti, because I associate buying this record with getting a box set of Ligeti, which I've got on the Virgo label. And that was at the classical music section of Notting Hill Gates Record and Tape Exchange. And there used to be a very nice tall chap there, very friendly guy who worked in that department. And it's when I took up the Ligeti box set to buy, and he said, I thought that wouldn't last long on the racks, and it's really good to meet somebody who appreciates Ligeti's music.
Yes.
And then he said, what would you like to pay for it? So there was a price on it, but
I wish there were more record shops like that.
Yeah, totally. What would you like to pay? And he must have been in a very good mood. It just suddenly occurred to him, yeah, what would you like to pay? That was great. So I think it might have been on another day, but this record was playing in the shop, and the same guy recommended it and said, look, if you haven't heard Alfred Schnitzky, you really should hear this record. And I have got other Schnitzky records since, which are also quite good, where there's orchestral music and organ music he's composed as well, quite often the Russian Melodia label. But this one is the one that does it for me. And there's 2 things I always kind of get wrong about it when I'm recommending it to people. And one is that I think it's something to do with the Russian Orthodox Church, and it isn't.
No.
I always seem to think Schnitzky is trying to communicate something of the principles and liturgical details of Russian Orthodoxy. No, not at all.
No.
And then the other thing I always misremember is that there's an orchestra playing on this record, and there isn't. No, it's just a big choir.
Choral music, yeah.
Yeah, choral. Yeah, it's all, but it's a huge choir, it must be, and it's incredibly powerful. They just got all the highs and all the lows, all the dynamics. It's an incredible experience just to listen to it. So beautiful melodies, and a very interesting theme of, something about loneliness and inner life is being expressed in the lyrics and the music. And it's very, very touching and very moving. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, you've sold it to me. I'll have to investigate. As I say, I've only really heard the name before of Schnitzky.
We'll start with this one and see if you like it, because you may not like the other stuff. I mean, some of his orchestral stuff does get a bit heavy, I've got to say. It's a bit heavy.
Yeah.
Nice one. Lovely gatefold, by the way. I'll just show you that.
Yes, nice. What label did you say again? It's a Russian label?
Yes, Melodia.
Melodia.
Yeah, have a look at the label if you like. Yeah.
Yes.
This one's actually quite well packaged. I mean, you can get some records from this Russian label where the covers are really thin. It's kind of like cartridge paper.
I've got an album by Marmalade, which is on a Polish label, and the cover is virtually like A4 paper, and the record is in one of those thin plastic bags. The pressing isn't too bad, but I just don't know how it survived, really, with just being so poorly packaged. But it's real.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. There was a Polish label.
Cold War packaging, I would say.
Yes, exactly.
It's decadent Westerners were used to, better quality than that. So the next record is, I'm going to talk about that crazy guy, Sun Ra. Of course, massive discography. But I'm quite interested, and I've only just recently bought this record, and I think there are 3 records of his visit to Egypt. So this one is Dark Myth Equation Visitation, which I think has also been titled just Sun Ra in Egypt, Volume 1. The story behind Sun Ra and the orchestra going to Egypt was apparently they were on a European tour, and then they found that the airfares to Cairo were actually quite cheap and possible for the band to go there. And you can imagine with Sun Ra, even thinking of his name and the his interest in Egyptian mythology and cosmology, would have been very excited to go there and perform in Egypt. So this album is from 1971, and I love that photo, and I imagine that or like to think that it is Ra and June Tyson going into a temple devoted to Ra, the sun god, because apparently the temples built in Egypt to Ra don't have roofs that open because of the connection with the sun. So I like to think that this quite hazy photo of the backs of these people in these wonderful outfits is them going into one of those temples. And I think there is one at Heliopolis, which is now a suburb of Cairo. But this record, if you have it, is it's partly a TV performance. Imagine Sun Ra being on TV in 1971 on Egyptian TV. And there's an interview as well, which is quite hard to hear. But side 2 is really powerful on here because it's a mixture of some quite, well, can you ever say Sun Ra is conventional? But at least group pieces which are rhythmic and have quite a swing to them, and also some pieces which are Sun Ra playing the synthesizer. And even though the instruments, especially as he was starting to play synth, the whole sound to me is very ancient. Well, that's the thing I get from this record is, obviously I know that it was recorded in Egypt and there's the connection with the mythology. But, it's quite modern music, really. It's quite avant-garde jazz, but it also has, I think whenever I hear Sun Ra play the keyboard, it's like he's tapping into something ancient to me. So that's the experience I have with this record. It's probably not, by no means, one of his best records. And I think if I was maybe going to pick a very spiritual record, it might be Magic City by Sun Ra. But I just like the thought and the connection of him and the band and the orchestra going to Egypt, which must have been. And the band do sound very excited. It's the playing is very intense, as if here we are in Cairo and we're playing in this place. So it's I say not one of his most amazing records, but I do like the link with the mythology.
I think with Sun Ra, you have to you hear as much as you possibly can, because it's like a huge jigsaw, and every piece in the jigsaw is going to mean something to understanding Sun Ra. We'll never get to the bottom of it. No. But no, I agree with this connection with the past thing, because this is a big part of what Sun Ra was about. And don't forget, he even had an instrument called the ancient Egyptian infinity drum, which may not have been ancient or Egyptian or indeed an infinity drum. It might just have been a big drum. But the name of it was clearly very important to him. And he wanted to connect to his ancient mythology and his ancient culture in a big way.